What is going on, everyone? Tutorial Tim here, and today we're going to be adding auto layout to date pickers, and I'm going to kind of break down the anatomy, and then we'll go ahead and start to build out these date pickers with auto layout. So currently, all of this is not set up with auto layout. You notice not even constraints have been applied. Again, this is for a mobile device, therefore, constraints aren't really there. But here you can see that there are several variations that we'll go ahead and build out. We have this input picker, the year selection view, which you can start to see it has like this column format mixed in with this row format in regards to auto layout. And then here we also have another calendar view where we could either sort of in this section here containing the days and then the numbers within the weeks, we could either categorize them and build it out via column or row format. And also we have a more complex layout here, the desktop date range picker. And I'll show you how we can break this down via auto layout as well. So this is going to be a little time consuming. So definitely, if you want to only build out a specific component, just kind of skip to that portion in the video. And we're going to start off with the more fundamental elements. So here you can see that we have a calendar header, and we also have a calendar header with a navigation for months, the month navigation. And then we have these smaller elements. And one thing that we need to note is that there will not need to be the need for having auto layout for these really small elements. These smaller elements, if we added auto layout, it would actually increase the width of its boundary, and we don't want that to exceed. Like, the specs are very specific as specified by Material Design System. If you reference their website, I have some of the specs for the components we're going to build out, and you'll notice that these boxes are 40 by 40 in order to select a date. So that's one thing to note, is that we won't be having auto layout on this element itself, but when we copy it and utilize the instance of this main component, we'll then add auto layout to it as needed, whether it's creating a row of these elements, this date number cell, creating a row of them, or a column, and then wrapping auto layout around that row, which will make our layout much more flexible. But without any further ado, let's get started. So here I have this calendar header variant, and I've already added auto layout, so we're going to go ahead and build this from scratch. So I'm going to create a new frame, reference the width and height, the width set to 328 pixels and the height set to 120, I believe. Yep, 120. And I'm going to select it, hit Option Command C, Option Command V. And then I'm going to go ahead and just select those elements and copy and paste them. And now that I have that, I want to ensure that the corner radius is appropriately set to the top. And now that we have the corner radiuses set, we can go ahead and just start adding auto layout. So how are we going to want to do this? Well, we have sort of this column layout here on the parent container, or this frame. And then we're going to add a row here. This will be a row. So if I go and with auto layout applied, wrapping this, and it will horizontally fill the container. So if I go ahead and hit Shift A, all my elements are stacking vertically by default, which is what we want. And we want to just go ahead and add auto layout to this date and also this edit icon. Hit Shift A, and then go ahead and select horizontal direction. And then the spacing between these items is set to 32 pixels. So we can go ahead and add 32. It gives us the proper height now. And what we're going to want to do is ensure that the frame, label that date and edit, and then we can also name this the name of the component this is going to be. And we can go ahead and justify the width now and set that to 328. So now that that's set to 328, don't worry, we're going to go ahead and modify the resizing property of this auto layout frame, set that to fill the container horizontally. And then what we can do now with that auto layout layer selected, I can go ahead and click on the alignment and padding icon and then set the space to space between, so that these two elements are snapping to the left and right proportionately. And one thing we could also do is even ensure that the resizing property of this text box is set appropriately. So for example, in the CSS, you may want an ellipsis to occur. And if you don't know what an ellipsis is, it's where the 3 dots appears when there's more text that needs to be displayed, but it overflows, for example. That's an ellipsis. And then we could set that text box to a fixed width, but if we keep typing away, it will dynamically adjust. Just take note of that. And then the last thing we're going to want to do is ensure that the alignment and padding is set to center, so that this icon is centered within the auto layout frame. All right, so now we can go ahead and test this out, and everything is responsive as desired, which is great. We don't really need to adjust the height, so we don't have to worry about that in regards to its responsiveness, unless there's some sort of edge case for your product that you will need the height to be responsive. And if that's the case, I think you could just set this height to fill container as well, so all of the elements will start to move somewhat accordingly. Again, we're going to proceed now with swapping these elements now, and then I'm going to go ahead and delete this old one, and with that removed, I can go ahead and, sorry, had the fan on. I can go ahead and proceed to making this the new main component. And with that said, I can go ahead and proceed to building the next component, which is composed of this component and another row here, this date picker row, which contains a drop down for selecting the month and also the ability to navigate back and forth with these 2 arrows, one for going a month back and one for moving a month forward. So I can go ahead and copy this main component. And then what I want to do is I could go ahead and copy all these elements here and then paste them. It'll paste them in place, and then I'll shift drag over to the right. And then what I'm going to do is hit Shift A, and then I'm going to hit Option Command C and then Option Command V to paste that. Whoops. Actually, I want to make sure I have this surface background, and hit select Option Command V. All right, got that wrong again. Sorry about that. So I'm going to go ahead and change the color to Material Design Surfaces Surface. So if I go ahead and enable that library here, and then I can go ahead and select in my fills, type in surfaces, and I'll select surface. That gives me the white background. And now I can go ahead and shift select these 2 elements, add auto layout to them, and set the direction to horizontal, and ensure that the alignment and padding is centered there. And then with that said, I can go ahead and proceed to adding auto layout to these 2 arrows and setting that to horizontal, and the spacing between those items is set to 24 pixels. And then what I can do now is add another set of auto layout where I hit Shift A on these 2 elements and ensure that the direction is set to horizontal. And then I can go ahead and with that ensure that the resizing properties are set to fill the container horizontally, and then what we can do is go ahead and select space between so that these elements snap respectively to the left and right. And I can go ahead and start to increase the height or add padding to the top and bottom of this element. So if I go ahead and select this date picker row and reference it has a height of 56, so I could even go ahead and give this a height of 56. So if I set that to 56 and then I make sure my elements are centered within that, then I am good to go. And the last thing I need to do is ensure that I have the proper spacing padding here. So I could set that to on the left and right. Whoops, need to reselect this auto layout layer, the parent one, and then set that to 0,24, and that pushes in the elements with the desired specs. So now that we have that built and it has auto layout, I can just double check these elements and ensure that the resizing properties are appropriately set so it's responsive horizontally as we want it. And then I'm going to go ahead and modify this width and set that to 328 so it's up to spec. And one thing about this is that the resizing needs to be set to fill container. All right, now that we have that applied, we can go ahead and just rename that accordingly, make that the new main component, and swap those 2 elements and delete the old one, out the old in with the new. So now that we have those elements built, I'm going to go ahead and show you how we're going to use these more modular So you could call them units, for example, these little elements, and we're going to compose a picker. So we can create this year selection view, and it really starts out with this foundational element right here, this cell, and we can go ahead and start building that. So I'm going to go ahead and move these elements off to the side, give me some room to build this from scratch. And I'm going to copy this, I'm going to copy this element and this element because I know I'm going to need both of them. And they're going to need to be wrapped in a container, that's for sure. All right, so with that said, I have some of it done already. And one thing you'll notice is that we can hide these or even hit the delete key, which will hide them in the instance of the main component, this date picker row here. And what I can start to do is, really ensure I know what the spacing is between these properties and the height of these cells. All cells in this date picker is set to 40 by 40 pixels, or otherwise known as dips in material design, for this specific layout. But this layout, it has a height of 52 pixels and a width of 88 and a spacing between of 8 pixels. All right, and the selected state has a width of 72 pixels. So let's go ahead and get that started. All right, with that said, I'm going to want this element to snap to the top, and I'm going to do this in a column format. I'm going to even kind of rename the date here and copy these two once more. And now that that's snapping, I want to make sure I have five elements to select from. And what I can do is add auto layout to that. So now I can move these elements around with the arrow keys with that auto layout. And then all I have to do is duplicate that once more. I can even ensure that there's a spacing of 8 pixels, and I can duplicate that again. So now I have these columns where I can start to move these elements around. And we also have a selected state, so we could even add a selected state to represent that 2011 or the year selected. And we can go ahead and even group these with another auto layout, add Shift A, and ensure that this is all centered. And what we're going to need to do is, with this content, it's going to be centered in this layout, but we're going to need to wrap all of these elements together now. So in order to do that, I'm going to just create the last piece needed in our system, which is this sort of bottom section here with this divider and these two calls to action. So the height of that is currently set to 52 pixels. So I'm going to create a frame. I'm going to select the width there, set the width to 328 and the height to 52 pixels. I'm going to hit Option Command C and paste that. And then I want to ensure that there's actually no corner radiuses, or we could set that to 4 and 4 on the top, bottom, and right of this element. And we could go ahead and copy this divider, paste it. Whoops, I'm going to need to paste that into my frame here, and then select Shift A, and we could either do it this way, where we add padding and it increases the height of the background, or we can go ahead and also add in these buttons. And now that I have these buttons pasted in, then I can add auto layout. And then what I can do is select my divider, and with the divider selected, just adjust the resizing property to fill the container horizontally, and then I'll re-specify my width here, and then I'm going to add auto layout to this as well with the horizontal direction, and then ensure that this snaps to the parent element, snaps the elements to the right and center. And I can even go ahead and add padding to the top and bottom of these buttons. So with this auto layout layer selected, you want to type in 8,0, and then that adds the proper padding, and now we have the appropriate height. And the divider is also responsive as well. So now that we've composed all of our modular elements to create this higher level component, we can go ahead and wrap all of these elements by hitting Shift A, and then I can go ahead and hit Option Command C, Option Command V, and that pastes my properties. And I'm gonna want to just remove the effect styles from this that I added by accident, and then we can go ahead and select our parent frame and then center our content. And this shifts our calendar so that it is centered by default. And that gives us all of the proper spacing between the elements. And that is how you create a year selection view. And notice with the power of auto layout, I can now start to move these sections as needed. And all you have to do is move your arrow keys around and ensure that you have the right layer selected in your layers panel. You can move these elements around and you have this year selection view. All right, so now let's create something more simple now that we've tackled a more complex component with auto layout. So we have this input picker, and I can see that we've already built out the majority of these components in our system already. So I need some buttons, so we can copy those, copy that text input field, and we can copy this this input picker header that we have created, this calendar header. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that, and I'm going to even duplicate this text field, bring that here, and then just grab those buttons and then move those over, and then it'll be as simple as selecting the parent frame of this main component, Option Command C, selecting all these, hitting Shift A, Option Command V. So now we have the proper drop shadow and background styles which are attached to our system. And I'm going to go ahead and add auto layout to these buttons. You know the drill, just making sure it's set to horizontal. Then in our parent frame, we're going to want to set that to bottom right, which will push all of our content. And what we can do is wrap auto layout around this frame, set the padding to 0 by default, ensure the resizing set to horizontal, and then center this element. And now what we can do is justify the spacing between these items. So if I go ahead and select 16 here, it'll space those elements by 16. And what I can do is add some padding for these buttons here, which is set to 16 on the right and bottom. So just select it, hit 16 there. And then there is some spacing that I need to specify where this is set to 20 instead of 16 here, but 16 here, as you can see in these specs. So what I can go ahead and do is actually from the parent layer, remove this, set that to 0, and I could add the padding here, a padding top of 16, and then a padding top of 20 here. So if I go ahead and specify 20, I now have the same height here, and we now have an input picker with auto layout. So you'll notice you can move these elements around and all that good stuff. So I can go ahead and copy that naming convention and paste it, make that a main component, and remove this, and boom, we now have our input picker component. So now we'll go ahead and tackle this calendar view, which will be very similar to how we approach this year selection view. One thing I just realized is I did not add padding right here, so I'm going to go ahead and change that real quick. Set that to 16. Whoops, looks like that's 24. No, it looks like it's even set to 40. All right, got a 40 aligns optically there, but according to the spec, it's set to 24. So I'm going to go ahead and change that. So it's set to 24, and that is good to go. And I'm going to go ahead and proceed to creating this variant. So we'll go ahead and we can even just copy this header element. And then what we're going to want to do is start to grab the different cells. So we can start off by grabbing the basic, grabbing the basic cell, the day cell. And then we'll grab just the date number cell. And then after that, we'll add in these buttons. So we're going to do this via row format. So we have the day cell. Here's the day cell. Here's the number cell. And you might be asking a question, and that question might be, well, why don't I just apply this day cell and the date number cell, both have the same specs. Maybe the color styling's different, but that's about all that's different. Everything else is the same. Why would you want to create two variations? Is that repetitive or duplicative? Well, that's an interesting point to ask. Sometimes these might have to be specific on the front end because these are actually pulling different types of data when accessing an API, for example. So, I think trying to specify those types of nuances with your developer team is extremely important. And I'm going to go ahead and just pause this and create the days here and then a numbers row. Now I have my rows ready to go, and we can go ahead and reference the specs, which I have via screenshot here. And there's padding, 4-pixel padding in between these items, and we can go ahead and ensure that that is done here. So we can wrap this in auto layout, set the spacing between these items to 4. Same with the numbers, the date number cells, set that to 4 as well. And now we can start to see this come to life here, where these elements are snapping. And one thing we may need that I'm starting to realize is we could have a row, and then you could add spacers here for the days that there are no numbers in the beginning of the month and the end of the month. So one simple way of doing that is you could either do it hacked up, where you duplicate this cell and actually just delete the text. So for example, if I need to represent this date and then a bunch of white space here, I could easily do that by duplicating this, Command Shift clicking on all these elements and just hiding it. Or I could have a specific cell that is its own main component, access it via the swap instance drop-down menu, and then just select that variant, which is probably the cleaner route, to be honest. So I could go ahead and create this, detach from instance, and then date number cell, no date, I could call it, and then make that delete this element in it because it won't need a number. And then with the advantage of that is when I go ahead and select a cell now, I can go ahead and swap this variant. You see how powerful that is, as opposed to just copying an instance and then just hiding the number, because you can't actually delete it since it's an instance of a main component that has the desired effect of having a number. So now with that said, I can bring this back to a date number, and we're good to go, and it preserves the number that was there before, which is really nice. And then I'm going to go ahead and just select all these variations and set that to no date, and then set this date to 1, and make sure that ensure that we have the right spacing and that they're stacking properly. So now that these are stacking, I can go ahead and duplicate this again and select all these cells. And with those cells selected, I can add a date there. It's adding the date, which is great. They aren't the specific days, so please ignore that for now. And then I can keep duplicating these rows as needed. And then I can duplicate this row once more. I can move it down. And then what I can do is I can use auto layout and move this all the way over and change that day to 30. So we got 1 all the way to 30 with the proper spacing. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy these buttons because they will be needed. And whoops, I'm going to go ahead and just paste those over. All right. Now with that said, I'm going to select this element and hit Option Command C. And then I'm going to select all these elements, hit Shift A, Option Command V. Now I have the proper background color, which is what we need. And then I'm going to select these buttons, set the direction to horizontal with the auto layout added, and then a spacing of 8 pixels between these items. All right, set that to 8. And then what we can go ahead and do is, with all these rows selected, we should probably group these. And then what we can do is ensure that these are centered. So I'm going to set the fill constraint to the resizing constraint to fill container, and then I'm going to center this content within that container, which gives us the proper spacing on the left and right, which is 12 pixels. And then with these buttons, what I can do is make this horizontally fill the container, and then push that content over to the right and centered, and then I can add the proper padding on the bottom. So we can go ahead and check the spec, and that spacing isn't specified there, but we can go ahead and reference the design where I've already built this, and it's set to 16. So what I can do is set the padding to 16 on top, and then on the right and bottom set it to 24 and 8. So set it to 24 and then 8. And that is how you create the calendar view with auto layout. And you'll notice that like you can even move whole chunks of it, or you can go deeper into the layers and start to move these around, and you can start to see the power of auto layout. Woo! And then that is all I have to show you. I'm going to challenge you to building this out, and I'm going to pause this and then get back to creating this with you after that. All right.